Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Alchemize with Alana. This is where we explore moments that shape us, challenge us, and ultimately recalibrate how we lead, live, and make decisions that matter. Tonight's conversation is for every high performing leader who's running on ambition, responsibility, or sheer willpower, especially these days, but quietly carrying energy debt. It's for those of you who look successful on the outside, but yet you feel drained, stretched thin, or disconnected from the purpose that used to pull you forward. My guest tonight knows that world intimately. His name is Adam Barney. He's an executive coach, creator of the Energy OS system, and is a champion of conscious leadership, as am I. He has supported hundreds of founders and executives in reclaiming their energy, sharpening their decision making, and scaling their lives as intentionally as they scale their businesses. But Adam's perspective didn't come from textbooks, it came from life. How? Well, I got to meet with Adam before today, and he shared with me that for him, there's been a lifelong intersection with neurology. He lost his mom to ALS, raising two daughters, one living with Canavan disease, who, thanks to groundbreaking gene therapy, is now walking and communicating, which is amazing. Watching his father endure hydrocephalus and redefining what strength, optimism, and leadership looks like when adversity becomes part of your daily landscape. He is a living example of what happens when you combine positive psychology, resilience, humor, and purpose. Today, we're going to explore a couple different topics, as we always do. The first one is energy debt and the myth of endless drive. The second, the glass half full blueprint. And the third, leadership at the intersection of levity and justice. Adam, welcome to the show.
I'm truly pumped to be here, and I love that we're doing this at night. Actually, this is my golden window. That 8 to 11 p.m. is where my brain finally starts to say, "Okay, the world has stopped yelling at you, and you can think again." So I'm
I
happy to be
love it.
here.
That sounds like a deep sense of self-awareness right there.
I mean, the kids are asleep. The dogs have stopped pretending they need a third dinner, and I can actually breathe. So
I
this is the
love it.
perfect time.
They do that, don't they? Yeah.
Mhm.
So I usually like to ask the audience a question before we really dive in. And the first one is, what's the one thing that drains your energy the fastest? And what's one thing that reliably plugs you back in? So drop your answers in the chat. And as I always say too, if anyone has any questions or comments that they want to leave, we love to address them. And even if it's post show, I'll come back and address them too. So, first topic, energy debt and the myth of endless drive. So, you talk a lot about energy debt, and it's a kind of a quiet cost, if you will, that leaders pay chasing endless drive, right? And many people don't realize that they're in energy debt until something breaks, like their health or their capacity to be able to do things, or they lose focus. So, Adam, what was your personal moment of hitting the wall, if you will, and how did it reshape your understanding of productivity and drive?
Yeah. Let me take that and say, the cost of endless drive, as that introduction kind of mentioned, is not an abstract idea for me. This hits super close to home, and it's been, it's been something that's very, let's say, lovingly and sometimes not so lovingly smack me in the face with reminders that I'm not a machine. That's, I think, an important reminder here as well. But let me take you back a bit, because none of what I do today, whether it's coaching, writing, or the whole energy operating system that I've designed, none of this came from strategy. It came from real life getting extremely loud at certain points in time. As you mentioned, 11 years ago, literally last month, I lost my mom to bulbar onset ALS. And if any of our listeners know ALS, it's one of the most brutal, humbling diseases. It strips things away slowly, and then all of a sudden they just disappear. When I went through that, I was in a phase of my own life where I thought resilience meant powering through, helping everyone around you stay strong, working harder, but then showing up to visit her whenever possible, as she declined over just about a year's time. then I'd have to go back like nothing actually had happened.
Mm,
There's a lot of telling myself, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. And the spoiler there is I was not fine.
yeah. So, y- so with that, what were some coping mechanisms that were supportive to you during that time?
I mean, it was about the building in space, right? So when people these days now ask about why I care about energy or consciousness or leadership with levity, it's because I've watched life bend people in half. And I've been through that. And it goes back to what I mentioned there with my mother. I will clarify, it's not our own daughter who has Canavan disease. It's our very good friend's daughter who has Canavan disease.
Okay. Thank you for
And
that. Yeah.
if people probably know ALS, they probably don't know Canavan. This planet maybe has 20 kids who have this, and the prognosis is really no walking, no talking, lifespan around 7 years. And their daughter Noah is basically the same age as my younger daughter, and also she's Noah's good friend. And watching your best friends navigate something like that, it literally rearranges the molecules in your brain. And luckily in that journey 3 years ago, she got access to groundbreaking gene therapy. And today, incredibly, if you look up Team No No online, that kid is walking, talking, singing, and actually bossing my own two daughters around like she owns the playground sometimes. And when we see her at a playground or when we do a kid swap weekend with our friends, it's like witnessing a scientific miracle in sneakers. It's wild.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, at least, we have that kind of innovation these days too, thankfully. But yeah, it sounds like that was just another layer of someone that you care about that is experiencing health issues, and it can layer on top of everything else. And somebody in the chat also thanked you for your vulnerability and sharing about your mom, because it hits home for a lot of people, that personal loss. And speaking of that, there's, it's funny, my last episode was actually about grief.
Hmm.
And so we talked about the different types of loss, and that can contribute to what's being referred to as burnout. And so you yourself, I think you said in your past life, if you will, that you had managed like 100 million in ad spend,
Yep.
and you experienced burnout yourself. So what's the biggest lie that leaders believe about energy and output?
I mean, it's exactly what you mentioned in the introduction here. It's that fact that there's this really unspoken energy debt that we all accumulate over time. It's one of the things that we all have as humans on this planet. And luckily every business, every solopreneur, every entrepreneur is still human, even with the increase in AI. When we bring that energy debt forward, it can weigh us down, it can slow us down. We all have the natural energy rhythms inside of ourselves, the things that boost our energy and the things that drain our energy. And that's the framework that this is all built in. It's something we all have. We have, I'm someone who I get supercharged by music. Music is what drives me forward and has allowed me to navigate tough situations, but also recharges my own battery. And if we don't find ways to recharge that battery, that's where that energy debt comes in. I mean, can you imagine spending the day as a high impact executive leader and you're working at 20% battery capacity? That energy debt is what builds up to keep you stuck at that. And I love to help those executive leaders and emerging leaders to recover that and work at a higher battery level. That doesn't get into super spoken about things like time blocking. It gets into some philosophical change and also some neurological change in the brain to rewire, to help people avoid that and rebuild that energy at times when things can be tough.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many different layers to it, right? The emotional, the spiritual, the physical, and the tactical.
Mm.
And then how do you become conscious of all of them? I even, about, oh gosh, maybe 7 to 8 months ago, had to admit to myself, as you and I, as coaches, support others in doing this for them, we also have to be conscious of it ourselves and
Right.
walk the talk. And
Right.
so about 7 or 8 months ago, I finally admitted to myself that I needed to get out of the house, away from my computer, and get moving again. And dance was something that I was really passionate about growing up.
Right.
Even when I was 15, I would be at the dance studio 15 and a half hours a week doing ballet, jazz, tap, modern dance, all of it. And then I got into salsa dancing about, God, when was that? Maybe 10, 11, no, yeah, 10 years ago, something like that. But I recently started doing it again. And I
Mm.
am so grateful that I finally started doing it, that it's become like a necessity for myself.
Right. Right. Well, and energy debt, is also one of my favorite things to talk about because we all know exactly what it feels like, even if we haven't named it up until listening to this right now. It's when you're functional but not alive. You might be doing the tasks, you're saying the right words, you're showing up to the meetings, but internally, I like to describe it as you're hitting a high interest rate on an emotional credit card.
Right? That's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
You know that feeling when someone asks, "How are you?" Which is a very vague question to begin with. And the real answer that you want to say is, "I'm somewhere between a frayed wire and, say, a wet paper bag." And that's what I mean by energy debt. And then the renewal side of it that you just talked about with dance and I mentioned with music, it's such a personal thing, right?
Mhm.
Some people meditate, some people maybe journal, some people stare out the window rehearsing, fights they'll never actually have even, I would say.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well,
then it's just it's you find those personal things that recharge that battery and you need to lean into them.
yeah, and somebody in the chat mentioned something about having it say even a morning ritual, whether it's prayer or breath work, just a few minutes of quiet. Some people like to do journaling. Sometimes I'll go through modes where I have an appreciation journal next to my bed.
Mhm.
I'm not a huge journaler, but yet sometimes that's a nice way for me to end my day and just writing down at least minimum three things that I'm grateful for or appreciative of before I go to sleep, which will then affect my sleep and then right
Right.
wake up more renewed the next day. Yeah.
Right. And I
Yeah.
think leaders, forget that their renewal is not optional. It really is something that's critical. It's maintenance. It's how you avoid becoming emotionally brittle. It's how you stop, snapping at your kids even because let's say your Slack notifications hijacked your brain waves, right? And taking those things that bring you back online when the world thinks, you know, when the world sees you as offline, it's really fun work to get into.
I don't know if it's fun for them, but yeah.
Well,
So
right.
on that note, how does as far as energy management, like how does that become a leadership skill and not just like a checkbox for self-care?
Well, this is kind of where things actually do get real because the priorities here, I think a lot of people listening maybe could equate it down simply to time management, but it's not just about that. It's about value management, and most leaders confuse, let's say, effort with impact, right?
Mm, yep.
You know, um, I bringing this back personally though. I've got two young daughters, 5 and 5 and a half and 9, and every day I think about the world they're inheriting, right? The legacy that I leave, the world that they inherit, and what I want to see. What I want them to see in me, it's not endless drive. I want them to see consciousness, presence, boundaries, and even the joy. And I want them to believe that they deserve a life that doesn't require burning themselves down for everyone else's comfort.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Somebody just shared that they treat their nervous system like part of their business strategy. That's
I
such a
love it.
beautiful way of
I
putting
love
that.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, and then what you just brought up too, it reminds me of a client that I coached. He was a director of engineering at a tech company, and I won't mention because it's well known. But
Sure.
during our time together, and he wasn't from the States, he was from India, and he has started, even though I was coaching him on things happening at work, he started asking me questions about some things we were discussing because I was also teaching him how to do heart math techniques, which helps you with your parasympathetic nervous system. Speaking of the
Right.
nervous system. And
Right.
he asked me, is this something that I can do with my daughter? And I said, absolutely. I've had other clients do that too. Like, share it with your wife, share it with your daughter, do it together.
Right.
And he started to, share with me over time the kind of time that he was spending with his daughter, and he was changing the way that he was listening to her.
Right.
So that, which correlates back to work, the way that these things, the practice of these things can help leaders is how they listen, how they collaborate, how they problem solve, and how they not only listen, say, with their peers or managing up, but also with their direct
Right.
reports on their team.
Right. Right. And I've realized over even my corporate career, that I sort of filter my priorities with three questions in that sense, right? One, maybe even bringing it a little bit back to a super practical way to understand it. Question one, does this align with what I say I value?
Mm-hmm.
The second would be, will future me be proud I chose this? And then the third would be, does this expand? And I love this one. Does this expand opportunity for someone with less privilege than I might have? And if it doesn't
Interesting.
hit those, it's just noise. That endless drive says if I do more, I'll be enough. But that conscious leadership says if I do the right things, I'll be present.
Interesting. Yeah, that I don't have three questions. I have two, but sometimes we're functioning against our own brain, our survival brain,
Right.
because it wants to keep us safe, the amygdala. And so sometimes I'll ask people to reflect on what it is that they're about to do for themselves. Both questions are somewhat similar, but just slightly different. And one is
Right.
what I'm about to do in alignment with the person that I want to become? If the answer is yes, then do it, even though your brain is like, red flag, red flag, red flag. It's not in my file cabinet. Like, right, you shouldn't do this. Or the other is what I'm about to do in alignment with what I want to achieve going forward.
Right.
Um, and again, if the answer is yes, then go for it, because you never know, even if it doesn't turn out the way that you initially wanted or hoped, you're going to get something from that experience to expand who you are, contribute to your knowledge, skill set, or give you an experience that will help you in some way to prepare you going forward.
And I mean, no matter the questions in the specificity that they're asked, also it gets into this idea of neuroplasticity that we all have in our
Mm-hmm.
brains, which is an
Yep.
incredibly powerful tool. And that's where, in my coaching, much like I imagine you operate in yours, it's not about just, having a call and walking away, because that asynchronous or that ongoing support is where that remapping of neural pathways comes into play. That
Yeah.
change actually happens, and it doesn't take, a week. It doesn't take a month. It probably takes 8 to 12 weeks to start to rebuild those neural pathways in our brains.
Yeah. And usually that's a perfect segue to the next topic, because some people who tend to focus on the negative or the other shoe to drop or waiting for something bad to happen, right? It is about reprogramming. And so with that, going to the second topic of, glass half full blueprint and turning adversity into autonomy, I first want to ask the audience, think about a time adversity forced you to grow. What skill or perspective did you gain that you still use today? We'd love to hear from you. So with that, you wrote a book, Make Your Own Glass Half Full, challenges the idea that optimism is naive. I kind of like that. And you call it a skill, a disciplined practice that can transform how leaders respond to adversity. So where did empowered optimism show up most powerfully in your life story, especially, in the experiences with losing your mom and, being a dad, any of it?
It it showed up in a lot of different ways, actually. To be honest, I mean, I love to dive into this because the resilience piece of it is really the critical changer. And I find, honestly, resilience is actually a funny word.
Mhm.
I think people tend to picture it as an iron-willed superhero who pushes through anything, no matter the challenge. And even in the most resilient people I've seen, including the families in my orbit that I mentioned earlier, they don't look like that. They look tender, they look present, they connected. look connected, and they're willing to feel.
Yeah, it's that
Um,
vulnerability piece, right?
the vulnerability, and even going back to Noah with Canavan disease, that's a hard thing for any parent to go through, learning that their child might not thrive and might not survive very long. That said, even as they were going through these challenges after the diagnosis, before even the gene therapy, they started celebrating everything. Every sound, every movement, on every unexpectedly funny face. And resilience wasn't them just being strong, it was them staying open.
Yeah.
And going back to even my corporate career where I spent 20 years, resilience was sold as endurance,
Mm,
longer hours, thicker skin, higher thresholds. But meanwhile, time and time again, and that's everywhere from, global ad agencies to even venture capital backed startups and global companies like Microsoft that I worked for, people were quietly burning their lives down behind the scenes. And I think resilience has a really tough, I actually don't like the word resilience. I would love if I could stop saying it in a lot of conversations.
what would you call it instead?
I, I, glass half full.
Okay,
That's a wordy
fair
way to
enough.
say it.
Yeah.
But none of this is about the ability to take more pain. It's the ability to stay connected to yourself, to others, to meaning while pain is happening. And I
Yeah,
think,
somebody, yeah.
well, I was going to say, I think in tough seasons, a lot of people default to one of what I see as three patterns. The first is over functioning, right? I'll
Hmm.
do more. I'll just outrun this. That's where I probably spent the original days in my corporate career. The second bucket is under functioning, right? You shut down, you freeze, or you simply hide under the covers until the storm passes. The third pattern that I see is conscious functioning. It's thinking about what's one honest next step that respects my humanity, and that third one is resilience.
Hmm.
Um, it's really interesting when you start to see people discover the change that happens when they choose conscious functioning over the other two, over that under functioning or over functioning that I talked about there as well. And it takes time.
Yeah.
But going back to optimism, and of course, it's not about toxic optimism, it's about optimism balanced with realism. But I see that when you tie it to autonomy, it's that opportunity to lead into that self-determination and what drives each of us inside of our hearts, and that impacts our brains, of course. But that opens up the door to face incredible challenges and pull yourself out of it. Had my mom never been diagnosed with ALS, I never would have gotten involved with the ALS Therapy Development Institute here in the Boston area, the ALS TDI, that's largely understood as, being responsible for starting the Ice Bucket Challenge, but also is the only dedicated research facility in the world focused on trying to find a cure for ALS.
Mm.
Also never would have led me to get involved with an incredible doctor named Dr. Michael Benatar, who's part of the neurological team at the University of Miami, who's now recognized as the world's preeminent ALS researcher. Those doors would have never been opened had I fallen into this realm with my mom being diagnosed with this and I just laid down and didn't get back up again. That's when you start to atrophy. When you actually flex that muscle and say, I can get up and I can keep going, that path, when you stay marching to the center of what's inside your heart, no matter what you do, if you stay true to that, eventually that path leads up in the world and you find that ability to recover. And, in the book, I don't just talk about my own personal journey. I weave in a lot of that positive psychology you mentioned that stems back to Martin Seligman, who's really recognized as the father of positive psychology. But then I also talk about thousands of years of stories from human history of people who've faced incredible challenges, and they've used optimism and autonomy to lift their way back out.
So on that, in that intersection of optimism and autonomy, and that ability to create mental and emotional independence from circumstances that you can't control. So how do those two things intersect?
I mean, in my mind, in the way that I view them, they're entwined at the absolute deepest level of how we operate inside of ourselves. But to get sort of, into how they're intertwined, at the end of the day, the circumstances, I guess, that you can't control actually shape the muscles that you do control,
Mm,
right? How you respond, how you adapt, and how you choose to move forward, even when the world doesn't give you ideal conditions. That's where it takes. They're uncontrollable, the uncontrollable rather shapes the internal narrative, whether we want it to or not. And the real work, the conscious leadership work, is learning to separate what happened from who you become afterward. And that's where that energy, that resilience, and that renewal actually begin.
absolutely. Well, and it's the like that the world can feel half empty in those moments too, right? I mean, I had a client one time years ago who he was going through some really challenging circumstances, and the way he saw it, he had three options in front of him.
Sure.
And I said, which one, would you ideally pick? And he said, honestly, none of them. That's how down he was. And so, it took a couple of sessions to help him start to move through that, because he just wasn't ready and I didn't want to force him
Yep.
through it. And in the end, he started realizing that at least he had choices. And
Right.
although none of them were, in that idealized realm, by just simply being at choice and picking one, at
Right.
least it creates movement. And then you never know what becomes possible as a result of that. And I often, in that saying of like, when one door closes, another one opens, I like to reverse engineer that and say, well, that second door can't open until the first one closes.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful. I love it. Yeah. I mean, it's that idea, of believing no matter how cloudy it is, how rainy it might be today, that the sun is always hiding behind the clouds, and you just have to kind of wait. And you wake up tomorrow and the sun might come out, and that's an incredible story you mentioned there, because it does take time to uncover and unwrap
Mhm.
this. I look at it as peeling back the layers of the onion,
Mhm.
and I love in my coaching, no matter who I start working with, one of the first questions I love to ask is, what's your origin story?
Yeah.
Where do you come from? All of us are so unique in this world based on the experiences that we've had in our past, and they shape where we can go in the future. And in that sort of vein, when life feels half empty, or when we feel like we don't have choices, naturally everything just feels tight and unfair and claustrophobic. And the brain does that thing where it convinces us, I think, that the only options we have are the ones we hate. But the moment you recognize, wait, I actually do have a choice here, something shifts. Even if the options aren't the glittery, sparkly ones, even if none of them feel like a win, you know, choice equals motion. I truly believe that. And motion is where possibility hides. And it's, I, I mean,
Yeah. It's that movement
it's that
forward.
human
Yeah.
spirit. It's physics for the human spirit, right?
Yeah. And this reminds me of a recent session that I did with a client. She was a director at a manufacturing company, and she came to a session, and in her words, she said she was completely overwhelmed. She had multiple deadlines, two major presentations, hiring pressure, nonstop meetings, and she's so organized that she has, she's got like multiple desktops and
Sure.
tabs open. I mean, I have a lot of tabs on my one little tiny laptop, but
Yep.
she kept saying, I don't even know how to get it all done. And by having a conversation with her about where to start, she realized she did have a system.
Right.
In fact, she was so impressive, the systems that she did have. It just was working against her. And so we talked it out. And then she could see the bottlenecks, and
Hmm.
how, things were too busy for her to even notice it. And then we also identified priorities, like how we prioritize things.
Yep.
And she had bucketed heavy lift tasks and created space for decision making. And then she also reclaimed time by stepping out of meetings that she didn't need to be in, and it empowered her team. And then
Right.
she also stopped defaulting to what I call martyr mode. Um, staying late, working weekends, absorbing everybody else's problems. She just owned the value of her time. Like that was the biggest thing she got from that session was the value of her time.
Right.
And by the end, she said she felt clearer, lighter, and more in control. So it was a very catalytic conversation for her. So this is where I want to mention, that I now offer what's called the Resolve session. It's just a single session, and it helps you to get to the root of something that helps you untangle the emotional knots to see the real dynamic clearly and walk away with something grounded, and have an honest plan that you can use immediately. So, Jesse, if you don't mind sharing that in the chat, that would be great. And martyr mode, somebody asked about that. How martyrdom shows up is its justification. People will say, well, I do this because I just want to help. And that's how they justify it. But they're doing it to the extent of it impacts them so much where they are tired, they're burnt out, they're overwhelmed, they have resentment. And when they stop justifying why they're doing certain things for the sake of helping, they might also realize that they're enabling people and not in a productive way, if that makes any sense.
Oh, that does make sense.
Yeah. Okay, so here's another prompt for the audience that I want to ask, and then we'll go into the last topic. Where in your leadership do you use levity to open or incorporate into difficult conversations, or where could you start? And as I'm asking that, I'm also not necessarily saying that you can do that all the time, because sometimes levity would not be appropriate in certain contexts.
Yep.
So be really careful about how you use it. That to say, if you aren't using it, there might be opportunity to do so. So, Adam, you talk openly about power, equity, humor, and humanity. So, and also, tools for justice. So, how can leaders use these intentionally without minimizing complexity?
Oh, it's a balance, of
Uh-huh.
course, but levity is something that really needs to be included because, and it's not about humor, right? Always, it's about levity that looks back in yourself. Sometimes it can be quiet levity. Levity doesn't have to be loud, and but it's a critical line to walk. I think about it in this way: humor and humanity together are actually openers. They're not erasers. They're ways of widening the doorways that we were talking about before into a hard way conversation, not maybe just painting over whatever's on the other side. And when I see leaders use humor tactically as well, it says we're safe enough to tell the truth in this room, right?
Yeah.
It brings down those walls. It opens up opportunity to learn and be open. And it can be, I'm not saying it's self-deprecation that's always critical, but that's an easier way rather than just bringing humor to blanket level. A little bit of that, a little bit of reminding people that you're human as a leader, whether it's through empathy, whether it's through perspective taking or actual curiosity, which I could talk more about, it signals, we're going to address this as a team together. And it could be something super complex. We're not going to pretend it's simple. And when you bring in the lens of power and equity, that's where it becomes really intentional work.
Yeah.
For me as a white male who grew up with every structural tailwind you could imagine, humor is something I do wield carefully. It can disarm it or it can diminish, but I really see it as an opportunity to invite people in.
Yeah. It makes me think of, so I guess I've never really thought about it before in this way, but it's making me think about how there is a distinction between being funny and using humor in a levity type way. It's like when people say that the tension in the room was so thick that you could cut it with a knife, that those might be the times where you
Yeah,
could use levity. And I think there is a distinction between levity and just humor for the sake of being funny.
right. And I think it gets into, I maybe asking a question for an internal beat, asking, am I lightening the tension to make space, or am I
Mhm.
lightening the tension to avoid the truth? And those are two very different
To
uses of
deflect,
the same
right? Instead
tool.
of, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I do love a good joke. My daily life is two fiercely independent, girls, two rescue dogs in the house, and a house where something's either always, spilling or you know, going wrong. And humor is basically carbon dioxide for us.
I love it.
But
Yeah.
in leadership spaces, humor really, I see it as something that helps to serve humanity and not override it. Um, you know, and and then, when we talk about justice, leaders can't shortcut the complexity of that, right? We can't laugh our way past inequity or discomfort. What we can do is use levity, I think, to lower the armor so people feel safe enough to do the deeper work. Whether it's naming power dynamics, using them, for positive influence, acknowledging harm, but also just simply being open to imagining a better path forward.
hmm
Um,
So, what with that, especially with younger generations, what future do you see emerging as these, younger generations push for purpose and meaning instead of like a unicorn status of a $15 million exit? I don't necessarily think they see it the same way that maybe previous generations did.
I mean, I'm 43 years old, and I spend a lot of time not only talking with college students, but also high school students here in Boston. And it's incredible, time and time again, having conversation with those students. Or even I've got some relationships with, professors at Columbia University who lead engineering students, who think traditionally of where an engineering student would go. They would go work for one of the big engineering firms, whether it's in, you know, government situation, defense, whatever the case might be. They're graduating and they're thinking, hey, I don't need to follow that path necessarily. The next generations that are coming up are have a wonderful way, and this is not everyone in the world, of course,
Yeah.
but I hear so many of these students that are going to be the next generation of leaders coming up saying, I want to get to a place where enough is enough. And I don't mean that of like enough is enough, I'm walking out of the system. It's enough is enough. I in the sense of I want to build something that sits in the center of who I am and impacts the world in a positive way. And if I can build enough of a stable base for myself, that's enough. I don't need to go make $15 billion as a unicorn. It's a different appetite. It's a different understanding. It's honestly a different viewpoint of capitalism, I think, in some way that we're approaching with the next generation as well.
Mm. So what does conscious leadership look like in environments that are maybe still built on old power structures?
I mean, it goes back to using that power and influence for positive impact, right? I had an opportunity earlier in 2024 to go through with the Harvard Business School a power and influence for positive impact program, and talk about an interesting idea that I always believed in my corporate career and in the ways that I guided my own life as a leader. But I realized that even as this through that program and really understanding it and codifying it in my brain through that learning, that even the smallest cog in an organization can wield influence and can wield power across an organization. It's just about using different strategies to use that power and have it impact leadership. I love a good underdog story, right? I love those junior employees that I had on my team back in my early agency days where I was, working with Fortune 50 clients and, had teams of 20 plus people. I loved the employees who came in and actually challenged me much more than I liked the people that I hired who came in and just wanted to do the work and not question anything. Or I questioned my own understanding of things all the time. I love when I have a team that actually questions what I'm bringing to them or what I'm recommending they do, or what I'm recommending a client does.
Yeah.
Push back on me harder. And maybe it's the fierce self-determination that I have inside myself that drives me. But challenge me. Give me an opportunity. If I'm doing something and you think that there are holes in it or something's wrong with it, I welcome that. I love that tough feedback way more than it's all, you tell me it's dogs and unicorns, and that's not the feedback that I want to have, right?
Yeah, because sometimes we're too in it or too close to it, so we can't see things that maybe somebody else can see. And there's always what we don't know, we don't know. Yeah, I very much appreciate that too. And I'm coaching somebody right now. Their company is just they're constantly losing senior leaders left and right. They're going through a lot of changes. And when I first started working with him, he wants to work on becoming a better leader, and yet he's having to take on a level of responsibility that he was not expecting. And then
Mhm.
he has direct access to the CEO, and then other leaders, but it's interesting the dynamic that's taking place of how people are either not open, they say they are, but they're not.
Right.
Yet they are down funneling certain expectations on him, but yet he doesn't have the authority. It's very interesting.
But you can build that authority by using that power and that influence and understanding how you can drive that. I mean, how many times have I worked with a coaching client who's saying, I have a boss who doesn't give me the time of day, who doesn't listen to me. I have a leader that just doesn't even know I exist. And I say, well, maybe you're just framing what you're how you're talking to them or what you're sending to them in the
Yeah.
wrong way, that doesn't resonate for how they work, how they look at the world, or how they operate.
Yeah. Well, and to be intentional about expanding that relationship or strengthening that relationship. I often
Right.
encourage skip levels if it's not a natural part of a company's organizational way of functioning anyway,
Yep.
to ask for it, but be intentional about that time, because leaders are very busy, right?
Right.
But yeah, we're definitely having the conversations about how to effectively manage up and the kind of language to use and what kind of language not to use. So um, anyway, on that note, I really appreciate you being here and sharing about your experience, both as a coach and also your own personal experience. So if leaders remember just one thing from this conversation, what do you think it should be?
Honestly, I hope someone listening here just feels a little less alone. Endless drive is something that's lonely. High performance can feel very, very lonely. And it makes you feel like you're supposed to be superhuman, but the truth is your humanity is the whole point, right? And if you are ready to move towards conscious leadership this week, try these quick couple steps, right? Name your energy debt. What are you pretending isn't draining you? The second, name your renewal source. Don't judge it, don't minimize it, honor it and respect it. And then, use those to make one priority shift that reflects who you actually want to be. It's not about being perfect. Nothing in this world is perfect. It's about just being honest with yourself.
100%. Yeah. So where can people find you if they want to learn more about you and what you do?
Sure. If anyone wants to stay connected, LinkedIn is where I'm most active. Just search for Adam W. Barney. And if you want a simple starting point, I'm happy to link everyone here to the free energy blueprint in the show notes as we close out here.
Wonderful. Also, for those that are watching, if this stirred something for you, and if you're navigating some kind of energy debt, leadership strain, or a moment that's asking for a more conscious version of you, you don't have to navigate it alone. So again, book a resolve session with me. And if you have any questions about it, we can always meet for a brief meeting ahead of time. And it can be really helpful in some sort of hard decision or an emotionally charged situation, to get you grounded and to see the real dynamics at play. And you can walk away with something that will help you be fully clear in everything moving forward. And then also in every session I do, clients ask for help either with a difficult decision or hard conversation. So I created the Conversation Prep Toolkit. It's a complimentary guide that you can get if you sign up for my newsletter, and it will help you step into those moments, those really hard conversations, with more intention, less worry and hesitation, and communicate in a way that actually lands. So feel free to stay in touch, subscribe to my newsletter, subscribe to the show. Definitely, like the business page for I Love My Life Coaching. And I thank you for once again being here for the Alchemize with Alana. And we'll see you next time.